The crystalline negotiation chamber gleamed with an ethereal light, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Juno Park stood at the center, his presence both unremarkable and somehow magnetic. His dark suit fitted him perfectly, not a single wrinkle betraying the tension that hummed beneath his calm exterior. The Orion Confederation delegates watched him with a mixture of diplomatic curiosity and mild disinterest. To their alien eyes, Juno was just another human representative, young, professional, seemingly insignificant. They had seen dozens like him before, or so they believed. What they failed to perceive was the intricate network of calculations running beneath his composed surface. Every breath was measured. Every movement deliberate. Each word carefully selected like a precision instrument designed to probe, understand, and ultimately manipulate. Coral, a junior diplomat from the Vesta cluster, felt something different. A strange sensation crawled along her neural receptors, a primal feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. Her species had evolved with advanced sensory capabilities, but this was something more primitive. Something that triggered the deepest survival instincts. Juno's hands remained clasped in front of him, fingers interlocked with a relaxed precision that suggested both control and potential energy. When he spoke, his voice was soft yet carried a subtle undertone that made the alien delegates unconsciously lean forward. "We understand your concerns regarding the recent territorial disputes," he said, his words smooth and calculated. The lead Orion delegate, a massive creature with translucent skin and multiple optical sensors, studied Juno. To an untrained observer, the human appeared completely non-threatening. But the delegate noticed something else, a microscopic twitch at the corner of Juno's eye, a barely perceptible movement that suggested something more complex was happening beneath the surface. Juno wasn't just listening. He was analyzing, processing, predicting. The negotiation room felt different. The temperature seemed to drop slightly, though no environmental controls had changed. The alien delegates shifted uncomfortably, unaware that the discomfort originated from something they couldn't quite understand. Coral watched intently. Her species had survived millennia by recognizing threats before they manifested. And right now, every instinct screamed that this human was not what he appeared to be. Juno's presentation continued, a masterful display of diplomatic language that simultaneously revealed and concealed information. He discussed complex interstellar agreements with a casual ease that made intricate political maneuvers sound like simple conversation. The Orion delegates found themselves agreeing to terms they hadn't initially considered. Juno's words were like invisible threads, gently guiding their perception, reshaping their understanding without them realizing it. Later, in her personal report, Coral would describe the encounter as unsettling. "It was not what the human said," she wrote, "but the space between his words. Like a predator calculating its next move, always 3 steps ahead." Juno knew precisely what he was doing. Humans had long ago evolved beyond physical hunting. Their true predatory nature resided in intelligence, in the ability to understand and manipulate complex social and political systems. As the meeting concluded, the Orion delegates felt they had achieved something. In reality, Juno had orchestrated exactly the outcome he desired. A perfect hunt, conducted not with weapons, but with words and understanding. Outside the negotiation chamber, the vast expanse of space continued its silent dance. Stars flickered, distant and indifferent to the subtle game of survival and strategy that had just played out. Juno Park adjusted his tie, a hint of a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. Another successful negotiation. Another demonstration that humans were something entirely different, apex predators disguised as diplomats, hunting not with claws or teeth, but with something far more dangerous, intelligence. In the sterile white research facility, Yoongi Kim stared at holographic displays filled with communication patterns, his fingers tracing intricate data streams. The walls around him hummed with sophisticated computing systems, each screen revealing another layer of human diplomatic interactions. For months, Yoongi had been analyzing thousands of diplomatic communications between humans and alien civilizations. What he discovered was far more than simple negotiations. It was a complex system of psychological warfare so subtle that most species couldn't even recognize it was happening. Humans communicated differently. Where other species used direct language, humans employed layers of meaning. A simple phrase could contain multiple intentions, hidden motivations, and strategic objectives. They weren't just talking, they were hunting. In one particular communication log, Jungi noticed how a human diplomat named Elena Rodriguez managed to redirect an entire trade agreement without the alien delegation realizing they were being manipulated. She used soft language, empathetic tones, and strategic pauses that made the aliens believe they were making their own decisions. The Galactic Intelligence Network began to take notice. Reports from different sectors started confirming similar patterns. Humans were transforming diplomatic interactions into sophisticated psychological chess matches. Jungi remembered an old recording where a human negotiator convinced a hostile alien species to reduce military tensions by simply sharing a personal story about family. The emotional connection completely dismantled years of built-up aggression. It wasn't just communication, it was psychological engineering. His research revealed that humans had developed an extraordinary ability to read emotional and psychological landscapes. They could detect subtle shifts in conversation, understand unspoken tensions, and navigate complex social dynamics with remarkable precision. In another fascinating example, a human diplomat named David Chen negotiated a complex resource-sharing agreement with the Centauri Confederation. What seemed like a straightforward discussion was actually a carefully orchestrated dance of psychological manipulation. David never raised his voice. He never showed aggression. Instead, he used empathy, shared cultural references, and strategic vulnerability to create a sense of trust. By the end of the negotiation, the Centauri believed they had won a significant victory, when in reality, humans had secured exactly what they wanted. Jungi's analysis showed that humans approached diplomatic interactions like elaborate games. They were always 3 moves ahead, anticipating reactions, planning contingencies, and creating scenarios that would lead to their desired outcomes. The most remarkable aspect was how unconscious this process seemed for humans. They didn't view it as manipulation. To them, it was simply effective communication. Their evolutionary history of survival, complex social structures, and adaptive intelligence had transformed diplomacy into an art form. Alien species started recognizing this pattern with a mixture of fear and respect. Humans weren't conquering through military might, but through understanding, a far more dangerous strategy. Jungi compiled his findings into a comprehensive report. Each page revealed another layer of human diplomatic complexity. Words became weapons. Emotions became strategies. Every conversation was a potential battlefield where psychological skills determined the victor. The research facility around him felt charged with the implications of his discovery. Humans were not just another species in the galactic community. They were something else entirely, predators who had evolved beyond physical hunting into a realm of pure intellectual and psychological strategy. As holographic displays continued to dance with communication patterns, Jungi realized he was looking at something revolutionary. Humans had transformed diplomacy from a mere exchange of interests into a sophisticated form of survival strategy. The galaxy was slowly understanding a simple, terrifying truth: humans were apex predators who had replaced claws and teeth with words, emotions, and an unparalleled ability to understand and manipulate complex social dynamics. And they were extremely good at it. The stars burned cold and distant as the Centauri and Rigel warships faced each other, weapons charged and tensions high. Centuries of conflict had brought them to this moment, a potential galactic war that threatened to consume entire star systems. Juno Park arrived on a small diplomatic vessel, looking unremarkable against the backdrop of massive military ships. No one expected a solution. Military commanders on both sides were prepared for battle, their fingers hovering near destruction buttons. The Centauri representatives wore metallic armor that reflected light in sharp angles. The Rigel delegation appeared as crystalline beings, their bodies shimmering with internal energy patterns. Both groups had generations of hatred built into their genetic memories. Juno carried no weapons. Just a datapad and a calm expression that seemed almost inappropriate given the circumstances. "I requested joint communication," he said simply to the communication officers. Most expected him to fail. Diplomatic missions had tried for decades to resolve this conflict. Generations of negotiators had fallen short, unable to bridge the deep cultural and historical divides between these two civilizations. When the communication channels opened, Juno began speaking. His voice was soft, measured. He didn't argue. He didn't demand. Instead, he started telling a story. A story about shared resources. About mutual survival. About how their conflicts were actually preventing both civilizations from addressing real challenges threatening their existence. The military commanders listened, initially skeptical. But something was happening. Juno wasn't just talking. He was reconstructing their entire perspective of conflict. He revealed economic data showing how their continuous wars had destroyed more resources than any potential gains. He highlighted shared genetic similarities between their species that no previous diplomat had ever noticed. He demonstrated how their conflict was actually a manipulation by smaller third-party systems profiting from their continuous warfare. What made his approach extraordinary was its precision. He didn't choose sides. He didn't blame. He simply presented a mathematical and emotional pathway to resolution that made continued conflict seem illogical. The Centauri commander, a veteran with decades of battle experience, found himself lowering his weapons. The Rigel diplomatic lead, who had never compromised in her entire career, started seeing potential collaboration where she had only seen enemy before. Within 3 hours, Juno had done what armies in previous diplomatic missions had failed to achieve for centuries. He had transformed a potential galactic war into a potential partnership. More remarkably, both sides believed they had achieved their original objectives. The Centauri felt they had secured strategic advantages. The Rigel believed they had protected their territorial integrity. Neither realized how completely they had been guided. When the communication ended, the military vessels that moments ago were prepared to destroy each other now hung in peaceful formation. Juno's diplomatic solution was so elegant, so precise, that it could only be described as predatory intelligence. He had hunted not with weapons, but with understanding. The galactic communication networks would later analyze this moment for decades. How a single human diplomat had rewritten centuries of conflict with nothing more than words, data, and an extraordinary ability to understand complex psychological landscapes. Juno Park simply adjusted his communication device, a subtle smile playing at the corner of his mouth. Another successful negotiation. Another demonstration that humans were something entirely different, apex predators disguised as diplomats, hunting not with traditional weapons, but with something far more dangerous, pure, calculated intelligence. In the vast, cold darkness of space, the ships remained in peaceful formation, a testament to a new kind of diplomatic strategy that the galaxy was only beginning to understand. The Galactic Research Commission's central research station hung in deep space, a massive spherical structure surrounded by holographic data streams. Researchers from multiple alien species gathered, their collective focus on one puzzling subject: humans. Dr. Lyra, a senior researcher with crystalline skin and multiple sensory organs, reviewed thousands of diplomatic interactions. Her team had been studying human communication patterns for decades, and what they discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. Humans were different. Not because of physical strength, but because of something far more complex. They didn't hunt with claws or weapons. They hunted with words. With understanding. With an ability to read and manipulate social dynamics that seemed almost supernatural. In one recorded interaction, a human diplomat named David Chen had resolved a 100-year territorial dispute between two alien species without firing a single weapon. He did this by understanding their cultural fears, their hidden motivations, and their deepest psychological triggers. The research revealed a shocking pattern. Humans could enter any social or diplomatic situation and immediately identify the underlying emotional currents. They could sense tensions invisible to other species. They could communicate on multiple levels simultaneously, saying one thing while meaning another, creating complex layers of meaning in a single sentence. Dr. Lyra's team discovered that human communication was like a living, breathing organism. Where other species used direct language, humans used nuance. A pause could mean as much as 1,000 words. A slight change in tone could redirect entire negotiations. Their primary weapons were not physical tools, but psychological ones. Empathy. Understanding. the ability to make others believe they were being heard and understood. One particular case study showed a human negotiator who resolved a potential military conflict by simply sharing a personal story about loss. The emotional connection dismantled years of built-up aggression more effectively than any weapon could. The research revealed that humans had evolved a form of psychological hunting. They didn't seek to destroy their opponents. They sought to understand them. To make them feel understood. To guide them towards desired outcomes without the opponents even realizing they were being guided. This was predatory behavior at its most sophisticated. Not about physical domination, but psychological manipulation. The alien researchers were both impressed and frightened. Humans had transformed survival from a physical act into a complex psychological strategy. They could deconstruct entire social systems, redirect massive political movements, and create solutions that seemed to emerge naturally when in fact, they had been carefully engineered. Dr. Lyra's final report was clear: humans were not just another species in the galactic community. They were apex predators who had evolved beyond traditional hunting. Their hunting ground was not physical space, but the complex landscape of communication and understanding. They hunted by listening. By understanding. By creating connections that seemed genuine but were actually carefully constructed strategies. The most alarming part? Humans didn't even seem to recognize this as a special skill. To them, this was simply how communication worked. They moved through social and diplomatic landscapes with an ease that suggested this was their natural environment. As holographic displays continued to show human interaction patterns, the researchers realized they were witnessing something revolutionary. A species that had transformed survival into an art form of psychological strategy. The galaxy was slowly understanding a simple, terrifying truth: humans were predators who had replaced physical weapons with something far more dangerous: the ability to understand, connect, and subtly guide entire civilizations. And they were extremely good at it. The diplomatic convergence chamber fell silent when Juno Park walked in. Representatives from thousands of alien civilizations watched him, their collective understanding fundamentally changed. Decades of research, hundreds of diplomatic interactions, and countless strategic negotiations had revealed a truth both beautiful and terrifying: humans were not just another species. They were something entirely different. Juno carried no weapons. His suit was crisp, his movements calculated. Every alien in the room knew they were watching something extraordinary: a predator who hunted not with physical strength, but with pure psychological intelligence. The massive holographic display behind him showed centuries of human diplomatic interactions. Each interaction was a complex web of strategic communication, emotional manipulation, and psychological engineering. Where other species saw conflict, humans saw opportunity. Where others saw barriers, humans saw pathways. The lead representative from the Galactic Council, a massive crystalline being named Zoran, stepped forward. His voice carried the weight of millennia of diplomatic experience. "We have reviewed the complete human interaction records," Zoran announced. "Our conclusion is unanimous." Juno stood perfectly still. No emotion crossed his face. But something predatory lived in his eyes, a calculated awareness that made even the most experienced alien diplomats uncomfortable. The record showed how humans had transformed survival from a physical act into a sophisticated psychological strategy. They didn't conquer territories. They understood them. They didn't destroy enemies. They made them irrelevant. In one recorded interaction, a human diplomat had resolved a 100-year conflict between two warring species by simply understanding their deepest cultural fears. In another, a human researcher had redirected an entire economic system without firing a single weapon. Humans had become masters of indirect power. They could enter any social or diplomatic situation and immediately identify underlying tensions. They could communicate on multiple levels simultaneously, saying one thing while meaning another. Zoran continued reading the final report. Humans are a unique form of intelligent predator. They hunt with understanding. They survive through strategy. Their psychological precision makes traditional warfare look like a child's game. The chamber was so quiet that everyone could hear their own breathing. Alien species that had existed for thousands of years were realizing they had been outmaneuvered by a species that was barely a few centuries old in galactic terms. Juno's smile was not diplomatic. It was the smile of a predator who knew exactly what he was. A smile that said, "We have been hunting you all along, and you never even realized." The recommendation was clear and simple: approach humans with extreme caution. As the meeting concluded, alien diplomats looked at Juno with a mixture of respect, fear, and a dawning understanding. Humans were not conquerors. They were something far more dangerous: psychological architects who could reshape entire civilizations without ever raising a weapon. Outside the chamber, stars continued their silent dance. Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, human diplomats were already preparing their next strategic move. The galaxy had finally understood: humans were apex predators who had transformed hunting from a physical act into the most sophisticated psychological strategy imaginable. And they were just getting started.